You are listening to the So Now What podcast with Lana Manikowski, episode number 76. Hello. Hope everyone is having a good start to the week. Hard to believe another week has gone past since our last episode. And I am so excited to talk to you this week about an area of focus that I learned about when I was in my life coach certification, and something my teacher, Brooke Castillo, taught me about consuming versus creating. And one of the things that brought this topic to light for me most recently was receiving a message from one of my listeners of the podcast. And I'm going to read you this message I received from her on Instagram, and I'm going to preserve her anonymity because I know how sacred your stories are. So I got her permission to read this message to you, but I'm still going to preserve her name. But she lives in New Zealand, an awesome woman who, found me through the podcast. So I'm going to put my cheaters on here and read you what this beautiful message had to say. These reflections are thanks in part to your podcast. Today marks pretty much a year since our last embryo transfer was unsuccessful and we ended our trying to conceive journey. It still hurts and always will, but I feel like I'm slowly emerging as myself again. I've been through counseling, which has helped me deal with my grief, but also works on other aspects I needed to move forward. I started yoga and have been in several overnight hikes with some of my close girlfriends. My husband and I have a 5-week holiday planned, renovations, and I am exploring what is next in my career. I would never wish this situation on anyone, but it's the one I have, and finding a way forward has reminded myself who I am. So I just have to tell you, receiving this message made me so proud that this listener decided to create something from the episodes that she consumes every week of the So Now What podcast. And I think back to some of the episodes she referenced. I was thinking about episode 32, Who Are You? So knowing that she's starting to find herself. Episode 41, Friendships When You're Childless. So here she is connecting with girlfriends and going on overnight camping trips. Episode 54, Will My Marriage Be Enough? So taking time to carve out more in her relationship with her husband. And then there was one in there about her career. And so I talked about that just a couple weeks ago, about your career when you discover that you're going to be childless. What's that next step that you're going to take? So being somebody who doesn't just show up every week consuming the content, but actually learning how to implement it in your daily life. And that's really where the growth and the actual longevity to this information really comes through. So, how are you going to take this information in? What are you going to do by listening to an episode? Are you actually somebody who is going to implement the work, maybe sit down and do the paper thinking? Or are you just going to take in the information, feel like you did something because you listened to a podcast, or maybe you bought a book? And for you, buying that book, you may be thinking that you're doing something to help yourself. But if you're just reading the words on a page and not actually implementing them into your life, how are you going to create that change for yourself? So I just thought it was so moving to me because I was somebody in the beginning that just thought if I lined my bookshelf with books, that would all of a sudden create the change. But it wasn't until I actually hired a coach and I worked with a coach and I gave myself the ability to be a learner and take in the information and realize that I'm not going to necessarily know how to do it right in the beginning. But the more I tried and the more I practiced and the more I implemented the tools that I was given, then I started to see the change. So I highly recommend that you take some sort of action. Maybe it's taking a class or signing up with me for Thrive After Infertility and dive deeper and implement the concepts that you're learning. And really give yourself just the ability to learn and take in and not have to take everything in at once. So maybe choose just a couple of concepts and decide, commit to yourself. If you decide to choose Thrive, that's why I do my Thrive container in 12-week increments. Just committing to 12 weeks gives you a short amount of time that it doesn't feel like it's such a heavy lift for you to take in all this information and commit to a year of working with me. Commit to 12 weeks, commit to one or two goals that you want to focus on. Maybe it's learning how to accept somebody's words when they ask you if you have any kids or they tell you you can always adopt. That is something that I talk about that I work on continuously and something that I have seen so much growth in because I've decided how I want to take in those words. How do I want to think about myself when somebody tells me that I could always adopt? I used to think that they didn't think I tried hard enough to become a mom, but through the work that I've done, I realize now that they're just offering me some sort of comfort. And that might be how they respond to the belief that they have that they couldn't imagine what their life would be like if they weren't a mom. So they feel like they need to tell me something that will make me feel better. But I've done my work on this. It's something that I was committed to. And it took me more than 12 weeks. But in those first 12 weeks, I really got clear about what I made those words mean. When someone said those words to me, I would have a side conversation with myself and say, okay, Lana, like literally, I have these conversations in my head. I would be like, okay, Lana, what are you making that mean? They said, you can always adopt. 4 words. And what am I making those 4 words mean about me? And I could choose anything I wanted. But if I was choosing to believe that they didn't think I tried hard enough, then of course I would always be rattled by those words. Of course I would feel shame about my inability to become a mom. But when I decided that I could believe something else about those words and start to feel less, um, I would say, like unraveling when people said those things to me, that's when I started to get my freedom and composure back when people say things to me. How I interpret them was up to me. But if I'm just consuming this information and not actually trying out how it comes up for me and how I respond to it and the story that I tell myself about me, then I'm never going to grow beyond it. So learning to actually implement paper thinking. If you take the exercises, I have 76 episodes to date for you to learn something from each episode. I'm not telling you to try all 76 of them, but maybe if there's one or two that have resonated with you, make a 12-week commitment to yourself on your own. If you're not ready to join Thrive, totally fine, but make that 12-week commitment to yourself on your own time that you're going to focus on one of these topics that I teach and actually create from it. It's like going to a Pinterest page and liking all these recipes or liking all these DIY projects, but never actually trying them. So you'll never learn how to make the dollar store Christmas wreath. And I give that as an example because that's something that I actually implemented. I created from saving the dollar store ornament wreath in my Pinterest page. And I decided that I was going to try it. The first time did not look good. Second time got better. Third time I realized I needed a hot glue gun. Fourth time I realized I needed different sized ornaments. And then here I was creating these beautiful wreaths that I was giving away to everyone because I was having so much fun creating them. So, as you're listening to the podcast, I invite you to not just consume the information I create, but think about putting a price tag on it. Imagine I charged you $10,000 access fee to the podcast. If you knew that you were paying $10,000, you would probably be expecting to take something away from it. So imagine that you have paid me $10,000 to listen to my last 76 episodes. What will you take away from an episode to make that worth your $10,000? Thank you for listening. If you haven't yet, I'm going to invite you to please share on iTunes. If you can go on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to this podcast and give me a review. Let me know what you have taken from this. Even if you haven't had a chance yet to implement something, let me know in a podcast review what has resonated with you in this podcast. Because I've come to learn that the more reviews we have, the more these algorithm gods share this podcast with others. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, leave me a review on YouTube, because the more women that get access to this through reading a review, or the algorithm sends this podcast or this video recording out to others, the more women can find the message that they can actually thrive and feel fulfilled, even if they weren't able to have the children they always dreamed of. So have a beautiful week. I love you. And remember, it is never too late to discover your meaning. I'll talk to you next week.